Welcome to today's webinar, Campbell Institute webinar, Best Practices in Contractor Safety, hosted by the National Safety Council, a leading advocate for safety in the United States. A few housekeeping matters before we begin. If you experience any problems during the presentation, please contact technical support at 877-297-2901. We welcome your questions and comments at any time during the presentation. You may submit questions electronically by typing them into the chat pod located on the lower left corner of your screen. Questions will be addressed periodically throughout the presentation. The link to the recording and slides from today's presentation will be emailed to all attendees. I will now turn the program over to Joy Inoue.
Thank you very much, Karen. So like Karen was saying, this is another one of Campbell Institute's webinar series. If you're familiar with our series, you'll know that we often put out webinars where we feature past speakers at Campbell Institute events, or we will actually present on some of the research that we have been doing. And this is one of those latter webinars. So my name is Joy Inoue. I'm a research associate for the Campbell Institute, and last year we put out a white paper on best practices in contractor safety management. Contractor safety has become more difficult and complex due to diversified workforces and projects occurring throughout the world. There are many varying practices in contractor selection, training, review of work, and because of this lack of common published best practices, the Campbell Institute set out to determine the best practices among our Campbell Institute members and partners for managing contractor safety at all points along the contractor life cycle. In the course of this research, we discovered many best practices as well as some common challenges in managing contractor safety. So that's what we are going to talk about on this webinar today. And first I should say a little word about the National Safety Council. If you're not familiar with us already, we're a 100-year-old nonprofit, and as the slide says, we are dedicated to saving lives by preventing injuries and deaths at work, in homes, in communities, and on the roads through leadership, research, education, and advocacy. We have over 13,000 member companies that represent nearly 8 million employees at more than 50,000 U.S. work sites. And we focus on areas where the greatest number of preventable injuries and deaths occur. So this is talking about workplaces, of course, also prescription drug overdoses, teen driving, distracted driving, and off-the-job safety, so talking about safety in homes and communities. Also, if you're not already familiar with the Campbell Institute is the EHS Center of Excellence at the National Safety Council. The Institute was actually named after Robert W. Campbell, who was the first president of the National Safety Council, and we launched in 2012 with the mission of empowering organizations to achieve and sustain environmental, health, and safety excellence. We do this through gathering and disseminating the best practices and lessons learned from our members and partners. Due to their investment in the safety and health of all workers, even those under contract, Institute organizations have injury rates that are 6.5 times lower than industry average and lost day rates that are 6 times lower than industry average. And our vision here at the Campbell Institute is to become the trusted source for protecting people and preserving the planet. Here is kind of a dated graphic of some of our Campbell Institute participants. We've actually added a few since this was put out. You can see the date here was September of last year. Right now, the Institute is at 36 members and 7 partner organizations that share this original vision of Robert W. Campbell. Each member goes through a rigorous application and evaluation process. I should have also put another slide here that actually called out the 14 Institute member and partner organizations that were involved in this research, but I'll just list them here. Each participant for this research provided an in-depth interview and or contributed their documentation of contractor policy guidelines. So that's where all the information from the research came from. And these companies are in alphabetical order: AECOM, BAPCO, BNSF Railway, Chevron, Cummins, Firmenich, Fluor, Georgia Pacific, Johnson Controls, NASA, Norfolk Southern, Schneider Electric, USG, and US Steel. And you will hear those names throughout the presentation. I will give specific call-outs to their practices when appropriate. So that is where we are headed today with our research and presentation. So to kind of give you a background of why we decided to conduct this research. In the past, we had done a brief literature review looking at the top compromising factors for contractor safety. So some of the previous research has looked at the ways in which occupational health and safety can actually be compromised by use of contractors. And one of the first things here that you'll see is that financial pressures and impending deadlines often lead to contractors cutting corners or engaging in unsafe behavior. Workers in temporary employment especially often work with minor injuries, perhaps because they are afraid of losing their employment, and this can actually make them susceptible to greater injury. That's the first box. The second one that you see here is that hazardous forms of disorganization, such as lax training and supervision or fractured information flows, can compromise safety among contractors. Contracted employees and subcontracted workers may be undertrained or underqualified, meaning they lack some of the certifications that they need. Also, the lack of communication and lack supervision can mean that they actually never acquire those needed skills or safety knowledge for the job. And lastly, what previous research has shown is that insufficient safety standards for contractors and relaxed enforcement of such standards can explain why contractor safety performance is often lower than in owner organizations. So these factors contribute not only to the compromised safety of subcontracted workers, but as you might imagine, those compromising factors can have spillover effects onto regular workers. And it's for these reasons here that you see that participants of the Institute felt that pursuing research on contractors was timely and important. This project actually began with the convening of 15 of our EHS professionals from Campbell Institute organizations in September of 2014. And in reviewing the research and studying the ways safety is compromised when using contractors, the group collectively decided to couch their practices within these 5 crucial steps of the contractor life cycle. So they actually went through some discussion, and they came upon, there was actually a lot of different steps in the life cycle that we had before, and we kind of boiled it down to these 5. So before work commences, there are typically 3 stages, the first 3 that you see here: pre-qualification, pre-job task and risk assessment, and contractor training and orientation. During the contractor work cycle, there's the monitoring of the job, and so that's step 4 that you see here. And finally, after the completion of the work, there's a post-job evaluation, which can be the basis for contractor requalification and the restart of this contractor life cycle. What I'm going to do in this presentation is go through these stages and highlight the best practices of research participants in each stage. You'll see that the majority of best practices are actually found in the first 4 steps of the contractor life cycle. And when we get to the last step, post-job evaluation, that's where I'll go into the common challenges that our Institute participants face in managing contractor safety. So first stage here, pre-qualification best practices. In the pre-qualification stage, all our research participants, so all 14 that participated, assess their contractors on their safety statistics, such as EMR, incident rate, DART, OSHA recordables, fatality rate, etc. These numbers are typically well understood across all organizations, and that can make them standard for data collection and evaluation. These numbers, I should say, are just the baseline, however, for evaluation. Some organizations actually compare contractor rates against those in the same or similar NACIS code. They may even ask them for performance on leading indicators. And I do have some examples here of what our Institute partners and members do. So NASA looks at incident rate compared to NACIS code benchmarks. They also look at workers' compensation claims, injury logs, environmental reports, and regulatory citations. So those are just some additional things that you can look at. Sometimes work involves smaller contractors that cannot readily calculate an EMR. So in this case, Johnson Controls asked for citation records and fatalities. Some members have contingency plans in the event that a contractor's safety statistics don't initially make their cut. In this case, U.S. Steel allows contractors to submit a continuous improvement plan that must be reviewed and approved by the company's materials management and safety department. Moving on here to the second slide. The majority of research participants, so that's 10 out of the 14 in the study, use third-party pre-qualifying agencies such as ISN, Browse, and PICS. And I should also mention that Browse and ISN are recent members to the Campbell Institute. So the reason why they use these pre-qualifying agencies is due in large part to the size and number of projects involving contractors at Campbell Institute organizations. The widespread use and large scope of contractors in global organizations like Campbell members often necessitates the services of pre-qualifying companies to basically handle a large part of that initial vetting process. And additionally, these third-party agencies actually assist contractors in finding performance gaps, and they work with those contractors to bridge those gaps. So some examples of this: Schneider Electric uses a pre-qualification agency to review proposed work procedures for high-risk contractors and to ensure compliance with insurance requirements. AECOM also uses a third-party pre-qualifier because of their experience in pre-qualifying contractors in the industry where they do a lot of work, and that happens to be for AECOM oil and gas. Johnson Controls, it's an interesting thing with Johnson Controls. While they do use pre-qualifying companies for some business units, they also noted in their interview that I had with them that using a third party to pre-qualify may actually exclude some smaller subcontractors who can't afford to be associated with that pre-qualifying agency. Many of these smaller companies may be minority-owned, owned by women or veterans. So pre-qualifying contractors exclusively through that kind of third-party agency may actually cause conflicts with their company's diversity recommendations. So that's just kind of a caveat from Johnson Controls, although they do use an ISN, a Browse, or a PICS for some of their projects and in some of their business units. The third box that you see here is that the majority of our research participants, so 11 out of 14, have an internal scale, checklist, or metric for which a contractor has to receive a passing grade in order to be approved for work. An example of this can be assigning a letter grade to questionnaires based on those safety statistics. Also presence of safety programs. There can also be a safety questionnaire that they have to fill out. So some things here, some examples. There we go. Georgia-Pacific contractors are assigned a letter grade, so that's A, B, C, or D, based on a combination of safety statistics, presence of written safety programs, leading indicators as well, and a performance evaluation. Chevron also assigns grades based upon incident rate, responses to a written safety questionnaire, and a field audit of written safety programs. And for both Chevron and Georgia-Pacific, contractors must hold a grade of A or B to receive a contract. Other organizations do not assign grades, but they still maintain some type of rating system. Cummins calculates a contractor safety performance metric that is based on occupational safety and health history, proof of permits and licenses, and documented safety practices and policies. Fluor Corporation rates contractors' pre-qualification evaluations. They actually have several categories here. So one is satisfactory, second is satisfactory with an advisory notice, then there's satisfactory with corrective action plan, and then there's just unsatisfactory. And those ratings are based upon a combination of safety stats, EHS policy, incident reporting, pre-test planning, and inspections. And I'm probably missing some other things there, but it's a lot of things to consider as part of the pre-qualification process. So that kind of covers the main findings that we found for the first step for pre-qualification. Moving on here to the second step, which is pre-job task and risk assessment. Under this step, 2/3 of our research participants, so that would be 9 out of the 14, had a method to evaluate the risk rating of the work to be performed, and that's usually through a risk matrix. And this is to place contractors in a predetermined risk category or a liability category. Based on this assessment, some organizations may require further actions, such as additional pre-job meetings and walkthroughs. So I have here some examples. Georgia-Pacific performs an initial risk assessment based upon the broad scope of work, and a second assessment based on the contractor's detailed work procedure that they provide. They assign point values for severity, frequency, and probability to calculate the risk associated with a given project. NASA has a similar process, but they also add things like cost, schedule, and security to the risk matrix, and they require contractors to describe risk mitigation plans. Schneider Electric categorizes contractors in 2 liability categories. So they categorize them as either A, higher liability, or B, lower liability. There's a similar process at Norfolk Southern. They assess risk in terms of insurance liability and the type of work involved, particularly if the work is being done close to an operating rail line. U.S. Steel requires that larger capital projects perform an in-depth risk assessment. And based on their findings, additional actions may be required of the contractors, such as a hazardous job meeting or job walkthroughs. And finally, at BNSF, projects are assigned a pre-qualification action level, and that's dependent on the risk level of the work. So that action level, with that action level, projects scoring a 4 or above on a 6-point scale usually require pre-qualification through a third party. Looking here, so the majority of research participants, 10 out of 14, specify that the general contractor is in charge of hiring subcontractors and managing their safety. So subs are held to the same standards as general contractors, and it's the general contractor's responsibility to apply those standards. And this type of responsibility that's handed off to the general contractor provides even more justifications for owner companies to be diligent about hiring reliable and accountable general contractors right from the very start. So at Firmenich, for example, one part of the pre-qualification process for contractors is to evaluate the contractor standards for qualifying subs. At U.S. Steel and Chevron, subcontractors have to meet the same requirements as all other contractors on site. And AECOM requires contractors to submit in advance of work a hazard analysis for all the tasks that they control. And this requirement is communicated through the subcontractor procurement process. General contractors choose subcontractors and are responsible for ensuring that subs meet the process requirements. That kind of takes care of the best practices that we've found for the second step of pre-job task and risk assessment. Moving on to the last step that takes place before work starts is training and orientation. So under this, all research participant organizations, once again that's all 14, they require safety orientation and skills training of contractors in order for them to be approved for work. And often these orientations and trainings are provided on site. Some organizations require passing a written test after training, and others may require the completion of an OSHA course. Looking at some examples here, at BNSF, contractor orientation is conducted using an internal online program, and upon completion of the program, contractors receive a badge that must be worn on site, and that badge will have some kind of documentation or notation that they have passed their safety orientation training. At Floor, contractors attend a contractor HSE alignment kickoff meeting with hazard awareness and compliance training to be completed within 1 week of the start of work. Firmenich's general safety orientation includes a contractor safety video, and that has a test directly afterwards on which they must score 80% or higher if they are to be allowed to work. U.S. Steel documents contracted employee attendance at pre-shift safety meetings and requires them to attend annual safety awareness training. And AECOM requires leaders to complete a 30-hour OSHA course and all other contracted personnel to complete a 10-hour OSHA course before beginning work. So here's the next box here is specialized training. Specialized training is often provided by Campbell Institute organizations. All organizations in our study require special permits or training for specific kinds of work. And that can include, but is not limited to, confined space entry, electrical work, hot work, energy control, forklifts, and elevated work. So we have other examples here. Specialized training is often provided by the Campbell Institute organizations in this study. So that can be hazard ID, PPE, lockout, tagout, fall prevention. At USG, these specialized area trainings are completed through a contracted online program. Cummins will offer refresher programs in job-specific areas, and those certifications are held at least annually for long-time suppliers. Institute organizations will also hold, so they'll hold the annual refresher courses, but they may also have contract worker badges indicate their training in specialized areas. So in addition to passing a general safety training, they may also have specific indications on their worker badge that they have specialized training as well. So those are the steps that take place before actual work contractor work is done. This next step is during the term of contractor work, so that is the job monitoring best practices. So regarding job monitoring, Every research participant, once again that's all 14, has periodic assessments during the contract term. And these can range from daily checklists and safety talks to weekly walkthroughs and monthly or yearly assessments. And I got some examples here from our participants. U.S. Steel performs daily inspections of contractor work to assure that it's in compliance with the pre-task safety plan that they submitted prior to the start of work. Chevron's monitoring process includes performance reviews and field verifications, which collectively account for 65% of a contractor's grade. The frequency of the reviews and verifications are dependent on the project's overall risk profile and the contractor grade. The second box that you see here is on safety observations, and our institute organizations also require safety observations from the contractors. So U.S. Steel requires contract employees to submit a minimum of 2 observations per employee per month. To track observations on a daily basis, this is kind of neat. AECOM has a mobile app to report noncompliance or unsafe conditions. With this mobile app that they all have, they can measure time to closure as a leading safety metric. And when a report is logged, the application alerts the contractor and tracks the time for the report to be closed. So that's kind of a neat thing that they have going on at AECOM. The third box that you see here is the maintenance of incident and near-miss report logs, and that's considered to be crucial to monitoring contractor safety during a project. Near-miss reports can be treated as a leading indicator and can be used to take proactive safety measures. Some of the examples that we have at NASA, contractors must provide quarterly reports on lost time injuries and dollar losses. And this information is included in a quality assurance surveillance plan to assure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely, seeing as NASA is a government program. BAPCO requires contractors to maintain incident and near-miss report logs to ensure that proper corrective actions are being implemented. So I've kind of gone through the first 4 steps here of the first 4 or 5 steps of the contractor life cycle. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is where you find the most best practices on the part of our Campbell Institute members and partners, where the majority of them had common practices in these areas. The 5th step of the contractor life cycle, I said, is the kind of the post-job evaluation. That's where we'll see some of the common challenges on the part of our Campbell Institute participants. So only about half of the organizations in the study, about 8 out of the 14, included specific courses of action for contractor infractions, with the rest choosing to deal with infractions on a case-by-case basis. So at USG, here are some of the examples of some that actually did have courses of action. At USG, there are consequences outlined for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd infractions, with termination of the contract after the 4th infraction. Cummins determines a course of action for infractions based on the severity of the incident or the supplier's conduct. They actually have a flow chart of actions that's included in the appendix of their contractor guidelines, and that has 4 steps. Counseling with verbal warning, followed by a first written warning, a second written warning, and finally there can be dismissal or even barring from Cummins facilities. For U.S. Steel, all levels of discipline can be applied to contractors, but every infraction is handled on a case-by-case basis. And this is similar to Georgia-Pacific's guidelines, which include a list of potential consequences for less than adequate performance. These guidelines are still left open for closer inspection of contractor performance and the safety incident. Some companies like BNSF, Johnson Controls, and AECOM employ an informal progressive discipline policy, but they also have strict policies for specific types of serious infractions. So for example, a violation of the fall protection policy at AECOM will result in immediate termination of a contract. Violations tied to one of 5 key exposures, such as lockout tagout at BNSF, results in work stoppage until the contractor is retrained. And for Johnson Controls, any conditions classified as immediately dangerous to life and health, or IDLH, are grounds for immediate termination of a contract worker. The second box that you see on the slide outlines another common challenge among our organizations, and that is the integration of contractors into an organization's own safety statistics. So that means including contractors in an owner's incident rate, fatality rate, etc. And only 2 out of the 14 participant organizations, that would be Chevron and Norfolk Southern, said definitively that contractor statistics are incorporated into the larger organizational metrics. Norfolk Southern tracks the number of contractor injuries each year and actually sets goals for itself in this area. Contractor injuries are included in the overall Norfolk Southern scorecard. Now I should say that while organizations, a lot of organizations still track contractor injuries even if they aren't included in the overall company scorecard. An example of this can be found at U.S. Steel, which tracks contractor numbers separately from the larger organizations, but those numbers are still shared and communicated on a weekly basis. And likewise, Johnson Controls tracks its own statistics and those of contractors separately, but they can aggregate those numbers depending on a customer's request. We bring up this inclusion of contractors into lagging statistics just because it seems somewhat of a departure from the results of a previous Campbell Institute white paper that we actually did on leading indicators. And we found that a majority of our Institute members include contractors in their leading indicator metrics. And so we were kind of wondering why there are so few of our organizations that actually do this, include contractors for their lagging metrics. One reason for this can harken back to the reason why many organizations, and not just Campbell organizations, choose to hire contractors in the first place. And a lot do hire contractors to offset risk and improve overall organizational lagging indicator performance by kind of delegating that work out to contractors. Some of our Institute participants in the course of this research mentioned that there can be some serious complications in computing indemnity costs when including contractors and lagging statistics. Several respondents to the previous leading indicator study mentioned that the reason why they included contracted workers in leading metrics, while it does make EHS goals harder to achieve, it does, however, provide a more accurate picture of an organization's safety performance. So a similar argument can be made for including contractors in lagging statistics. It does make your organizational goals harder to achieve, but it's actually more telling of an organization's overall performance. And it develops a stronger team spirit and a shared vision for EHS between owners and contractors. So for this reason, we found that not including contractors in lagging metrics remains a common challenge for the majority of participants in this study. The final box that you see here is that there seems to be a lack of evaluation for contractors after the work has been completed. Only a few of our research participants, that would be 5 out of the 14 in this study, had a formal post-job evaluation or specific guidelines for contractor requalification. I do have some examples of that, though. Cummins has a safety performance assessment of all suppliers once a year, or near the end of the contract period. Georgia-Pacific considers post-work evaluation results when a contractor bids on future jobs. And Johnson Controls post-job performance assessments take into account safety, customer service, and the quality of the finished work. Some participants may not call it a formal post-job evaluation, but they have processes that serve as an evaluation nonetheless. U.S. Steel has a safety and operating inspection that is completed for every process change that is not part of the routine maintenance work. Chevron's periodic performance reviews also capture an evaluation of contractor performance after a job is done. And AECOM's Industry Safe Management System records incidents tied to a contractor, and they will save that information for future use in the case that that contractor bids on another project. So while a lot of the research participants didn't have a kind of formal post-job evaluation, many did, however, express a desire to incorporate more post-work evaluative methods because a sufficient evaluation stage is needed to determine if work was done correctly and safely. Only a few participants mentioned a type of process to determine the effectiveness of contractor work. USG looks at the number of claims from contractors as a measure if the work was performed safely. U.S. Steel Management reviews a contractor's measurement of the effectiveness of safety orientation training. And AECOM performs an internal evaluation if contractor reports were turned in, if contractor safety plans were reviewed, and if at-risk behaviors were immediately addressed. And this kind of evaluation not only indicates how well contractors performed their work, but also how well AECOM managed their safety. So that takes us through the contractor life cycle. I have here on this slide a summary of the best practices and common challenges that we looked at in the previous slides. This graphic can also be found in our white paper that you can download online. We can say with certainty that the pre-qualification process of contractors is rigorous across the organizations represented in this study. The analysis of safety statistics is standard. The Campbell participants have gone beyond looking merely at numbers, and they also consider a contractor's use of safety programs, even leading indicators, and presence of continuous improvement plans. The effort put into orienting and training contractors is evidence of the need to mitigate risk and extend the culture of safety to all workers on site, temporary or otherwise. Several participants mentioned the benefit of helping contractors achieve better performance through more rigorous training and adherence to policies, and thereby you can lift the standard of the industry as a whole. And with this thinking, there is more to contracting out work than just reducing risk and exposure, and there's more to be gained by truly owning and managing contractor safety. On the challenges side, the extensive vetting process makes it a little surprising that so few of the participants in the study had a method of evaluating contractors once the work is finished. Most participants agreed, however, that thorough post-work evaluations and a rubric for contractor requalification are good practices to have. And integrating contractors, once again, into owner safety metrics is another area where there's less consensus. However, given time, this may be another best practice among high-performing EHS organizations. So if you are interested in this research, we do have a URL on this slide where you can go to download the white paper. That's the cover of the white paper that you see here. You can also download all of our other research that we've done in the past 3 years. We have a lot of research going back to leading indicators, also on EHS leadership, world-class EHS practices, risk perception. Those are all studies that you can find at this website. There's also probably more detailed descriptions of the practices that I described in this presentation. So if you're at all interested in that, I suggest going to our website, thecampbellinstitute.org/research, and download the white paper. And finally, I would like to mention that if you find these Campbell Institute webinars interesting, we invite you to continue having conversations with the Institute through our events, specifically our Campbell Institute Symposium, which is coming up next month. It's February 25th and 26th in Austin, Texas. You could be exposed to forward-looking EHS ideas that will spur meaningful action in your organization. You can network with other EHS professionals, learn from experts, and take away valuable ideas from the tabletop discussions. The event will actually be kicked off with a keynote presentation from Todd Conklin, who, if you are in the safety world, you probably know his name. And also we'll have topics including human performance, risk management, future innovations, health and well-being, and the integration of EHS. And we'll also have a closing keynote from noted sustainability thought leader Andrew Winston. So it really promises to be a great event in Austin next month. We hope you'll join us for our third symposium. Registration is still open, and you can find out more by going to the website. The campbellinstitute.org/symposium will take you there. And also, we encourage you to continue having conversations here with us about contractor management or any other topic, EHS topic that you prefer. We have a LinkedIn group that you can connect with us. You can search for Campbell Institute and it will take you there. We also have a Twitter account. Our Twitter handle is @RWC Institute. So you can look for news and events and just other announcements from us on these two channels. With that that kind of concludes the research portion and presentation part of the webinar. I am here to take any questions that you might have and to answer them to the best of my ability. Just to give you a caveat, once again, I am the research associate for the Campbell Institute. I am not myself an EHS professional, although I have talked to many in the course of this research. So I might have to refer you to some of our experts in the industry and in the field for some of your questions, but I will do my best to address all that you have. So, Karen?
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone how to ask a question. Just to ask a question via the web presentation, select the chat pod in the lower left corner of your screen and then type and send your question that way. And there's quite a few questions there, so I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. So I see some things here. And I'm trying to go through here. There's a question here, how many of the 14 companies that were used in this paper used a third party for pre-qualification? That is a good question. I'm trying to look it up right now from here, and it says that 10 of the 14 companies use a third party pre-qualifying agency to pre-qualify their contractors. And here's another question here. Can I list the third-party pre-qualifying agencies referenced? Yes. So there are probably a lot out there, but the ones that were most mentioned by our interviewees were ISN, Browse, and PICS. So those are the 3 agencies there. And like I said in the presentation, both Browse and ISN are recent members to the Campbell Institute. So we have some good relationships there. Let's see. I see a question here for the mobile app, and I think that's referring to the mobile app that AECOM used to report hazards and track time to closure. That's a good question. The name of the app, and I'm not sure if AECOM has exclusive rights to this. They may have developed it in-house themselves, but it's called Lifeguard. That's the name of the mobile application. So, like I said, I'm not sure if that's just something that can be downloaded or if it's an AECOM exclusive application, but it's something to look up. But that is the name of what they have here. Do I have the data that I presented in tabular form? I do not have it in tabular form, at least for public viewing, but yes, it can be produced. So that's actually a good question and something that we can actually maybe produce for our general public and have available along with the white paper. Other things here. Is anyone using technology, cameras, telepresence, etc., to monitor contractors working remotely? That is a good question. I know that there may have been some organizations in the course of the research that mentioned that they had some things like that, that kind of technology. I'm not sure how many of them have it and also what types that they use, but that would be a good question, I would say, to bring up to a discussion group on our LinkedIn site. So if you join our LinkedIn group, you can actually pose questions to the Campbell Institute community and to our members specifically, and ask them what kinds of technology they use to monitor contractors or even remote workers. So I encourage you to maybe post that question to that site. And let me see what else is here. Was there any benchmarking with companies where they take the contractor observations data and the company contract manager observations and develop plans for improvement? I'm not actually sure about that. That's also another good question that we can actually bring up to the group. But that sounds like perhaps a good practice to take on, to look at the observations from contractors and compare them for improvement plans. I'm actually not aware of any benchmarking that has been done in that regard. Let's see. Here's a good question here. Actually, there's 2 questions that are similar. Are there any available checklists to go with the best practices discussed? And are there some sample contractor evaluation checklists and behavioral observation forms? The answer to that is yes. We do have some of this documentation from our Campbell Institute members on our Campbell library. So if you go to our Campbell Institute website, you can click on the link for the library. You do have to create an account, but that doesn't take very long, and it's also free. And then in addition to seeing some of the documentation from our contractor, from our member contractor programs, you can also find lots of other resources there, not just for managing contractor safety, but almost any other EHS topic that you're interested in. But I do know that some of the documentation that was provided to me during the course of the research was uploaded to the library. And that's actually a good reminder for me to get the ones that haven't yet been uploaded to the library also there. So thank you for that question. Let's see here. Here's a question of what are the regulatory requirements to include contractor injuries and events in a company scorecard? I'm not actually familiar with any off the top of my head. I do know that sometimes that regulations are changing, and that this may be something that companies are required to do, that they are required to include contractor injuries, events, fatalities into their own statistics. And I think that's getting to this larger point of taking care of and being responsible for the safety of the entire workforce, contracted or otherwise. At the moment, I don't think there is anything specifically in place to require companies to include contractors or temporary workers of that nature into their overall statistics. And so that's kind of the one of the reasons why you see so many contractors being used to kind of offset the risk to the overall company. So let's see another thing. Given the lack of agreement on what constitutes meaningful leading indicators for workplace safety, what standards are driving these requests, and what validity exists to support the use of host employer leading indicators? It's a great question. I don't know if I can really answer that fully, but I would say at this point that really it is the host employer that drives the leading indicators for the contractors at this point. But I would also say that sometimes if you have a company, a pre-qualifying agency like Browse, ISN, or PICS, they may have specific leading indicators that they're looking at as well when it comes to evaluating contractors through their own process and their own system. So depending upon the owner company and depending upon the agency they use, if any, that can be the basis for using leading indicators and evaluating contractors. But the asker of this question is certainly right. There is not, there certainly isn't consensus on which leading indicators are best or which ones should be used in evaluating companies and contractors. Let's see. Let's see, I already answered that question on third-party pre-qualification companies. So there's a question here on is this peer-reviewed research, and if so, can I provide citations? This is not peer-reviewed research. This has not been published in any academic journal. This is a white paper that we just put out here as an organization through the Campbell Institute. However, there are, if you download the white paper, you can see that there's a short literature review at the very beginning that looks at some of the previous peer-reviewed research that has been done on managing contractor safety, the ways in which use of contractor work can be hazardous or pose hazards to the workplace. So that information is in the white paper, and there's actually at the end of the white paper as well a works cited page with a lot of different sources that you can go to find more information if you are interested in specifically peer-reviewed work. Okay. So here's a question. You focus on large contractors, which all have established safety systems. We deal with 50-plus small contractors. Do you have any studies showing safety accreditation system for small contractors? I would say I do not specifically have any research for small contractors, though. I will say that some of our Campbell Institute members who hire contractors, they probably have experience specifically in hiring small contractors. So I mean, not from a research perspective, but from a very experiential and industry perspective, they could help you out there. Like I mentioned in the presentation, Johnson Controls probably does a lot of work with smaller contractors, so that would probably be the first person that I would go to ask a question like that. But as to specifically your question, do I have any studies showing that? For small contractors, I do not. And that kind of maybe takes care of this other question too, if the white paper has any best practices specific for small or remote facilities. At this point, no, it does not. And let's see. Trying to read. Can I repeat the 14 participants used in the research? Yes, I can. So we do have AECOM, BAPCO in the Middle East, BNSF Railway, Chevron, Cummins, Firmenich, Fluor, Georgia Pacific, Johnson Controls, NASA, Norfolk Southern, Schneider Electric, USG, and US Steel. And another question there is, are any of the companies international? Yes, BAPCO definitely is international. And a lot of these, even if they're not, even if they're headquartered in the United States, these are really big companies. They have international footprints. And so they probably also have, even though they're not international by nature, they are U.S. companies, they probably have lots of policies and guidelines to deal with contractors around the world. I venture to say I believe that BAPCO's contractor policy is already on our library, so if you're interested in that, you can find it there. But I will also, after this call, make sure that all of our documentation that we have is uploaded to our Campbell Institute library. Here's a question here of how are temporary employees handled by these companies? I don't know if I have a specific answer to that. Temporary employees often are kind of thrown into the same group as contracted employees. I will say that maybe a place where you find more of that kind of temporary work can be in international work sites. You don't necessarily have workforces where you need it, when you need it at a specific job site, at a place around on the other side of the globe. I'm not sure specifically how our Campbell Institute companies treat temporary workers versus those under a contract. But it's a good question, and that's something that I would probably pose to the Campbell Institute discussion page on our LinkedIn site. Okay, and it looks like that we are at the top of the hour. I thank you so much for your questions. I hope that I was able to answer them adequately. If you have any other follow-up questions or things that you would want answered, please feel free to email the Institute or connect with us, like I said, on LinkedIn or Twitter. A copy of this webinar will be available at the Campbell Institute website. You should give us maybe a couple days to get it uploaded, but it will be there. So if you ever want to view it later, or if you have colleagues who would like to view it later, it will be on our website. And once again, I just want to make another plug for the Campbell Institute Symposium. If you're interested in attending, please visit the website. And it promises to be a great time. Lots of learning, lots of discussion and networking, and we'd love to see you there. Thanks all for joining, and have a good rest of the day.